All right, hello, this is part 2 of Anthropology of Flood Myths. Coming back to the top slide here. Last time we looked at myth, and I want to tell the people who are listening to the recording, since I recorded number 1, I made a few adjustments to the slides, so I'll point that out. So in some cases, I took out URLs, I substituted URL links, like this one, I'm not things up. Or in some cases with broken links, I had like that some substitutions. On this slide, I added a couple of paragraphs here, give some details about how the Epic of Gilgamesh and Genesis are parallel to each other. The link in there. And so last time we looked at 3 myths from Mesopotamia, including Sumeria and Babylon. That's the Epic of Gilgamesh. We looked at the Noah myth from the book of Genesis, that is shared by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And we looked at at this slide like here, the myth of Deucalion. It's told in Greek literature, its metamorphosis. And we saw that they had a lot in common, even though some details are different. And one common element, back slides here, is that they all appear to come out of a singular event 7,500 years ago, when the Black Sea flooded. And so that many of the cultures surrounding the Black Sea developed the same event. Okay, so we can now ask ourselves, is there one myth that traveled all around the world? And to do that, we're going to look at myths from another part of the world. So our last 2 myths come from Central America and North America. So first we have the Maya flood. And so at the bottom, I have the text of the myth. It's basically taken from the website that I have earlier in the slideshow, and I copied it there. And so let me read this. I'm coming to the board here. Okay, so this is the myth of the Quiche people of Guatemala. They're one of a few dozen different Maya groups. The Maya are not one people. They're kind of a cluster of people that are related in their language and their culture. The Quiche are a large group that live in Guatemala. Still different, not gone. So each group of Maya has slight variations on the myth. So this one has a few elements you don't find in others, but it has what we need. Okay, so the wooden people, an early version of humanity, were imperfect, right? So that imperfection, that is parallel to what we encountered in the other myths in terms of human wickedness or angering Zeus and all of that. Okay, so they were imperfect because there was nothing in their hearts and minds, and they did not remember Heart of Sky. So Heart of Sky is the creator deity. He's one actually of a pair of creator deities. The Maya had a pair rather than a singular. So Heart of Sky destroyed them with a flood. He sent down a black rain of resin. Animals came into their houses and attacked them, and even pots and stones crushed them. That's kind of like a little bit of a more wicked version of Fantasia, where things go crazy with Mickey Mouse is trying to animate brooms and so forth. Now the brooms and pots and everything are attacking people. The dogs and turkeys told them, apparently they could talk, "You cause us pain, you ate us, now we eat you." Their other animals and implements likewise turned on them. They tried to escape onto their houses, into trees and into caves, but the houses collapsed, trees threw them off, and the caves slammed shut. Today's monkeys are a sign of these people. We are mannequins. This was before the sun dawned on the earth. Okay, so that's one story. Another story has this element I also included. Some men tried to save themselves from the deluge by making boxes and going underground in them. God, or heart of the sky in this case, didn't approve of this and turned them into bees. Okay, so that's that later one is reference to some belief that one of the coming ages is the age of the bees. We're for the Maya, we are in the age of corn, but each turn of the calendar cycle has something that defines it a little differently. So next one to some people is the age of actually bees and honey. So this later, the second myth makes reference to that. All right, so we have a deluge, we have a flood, it's due to wickedness. Some people tried to save themselves by making boxes, but that didn't work. So a major difference we have here from the previous myths is there are no survivors. Essentially, the gods have to recreate humanity themselves out of a different element. And that element could have been honey. It's not quite specified here. It could be corn, most likely corn. So we are the hombres de maíz, the men of maize. That's the name of a famous novel by a Salvadoran writer, showing that for this cycle the gods made us out of corn. So no survivor, no ark, no mountain, nor birds or anything like that. The only element really retained is that the deluge, the flood, comes because of imperfection. And there's kind of an interesting metaphor here that, depending on your own dialect of English, could even exist in English. So humans were wooden people, and there's nothing in their hearts and minds. So in other words, they're made out of wood, and it's kind of like what's a famous story about a kid made out of wood? Pinocchio. But the humanness had to be put in him. But in this case, no humanness was put into this person. And then there's the expression that a person is wooden. Again, in some dialects of English, you might not be familiar with this. So a person who is wooden is unemotional. So that is a metaphor that might also relate to this. So that's the imperfection. Humans were not emotional. They had nothing in their hearts and mind, and this is necessary in order to be able to serve the gods. Maya had this concept that the universe continues as long as there's a mutual obligation held up for humans to serve the gods and gods to serve humans. Two-way street. When that breaks down, that's when the universe crumbles, and and then the next cycle starts. Okay, so from all evidence, looking at bullet 2 up here, this myth is independently invented. So there's two concepts that have to do with new cultural creations. So we mentioned the previous one earlier, diffusion. Something is created in one culture and it diffuses or travels from one culture to another. The other option is that you're at the origin. It's your culture or the culture you're talking about where the thing was invented. So even in diffusion, something has to be independently invented somewhere and diffused to other places. So in this case, we have an independent dimension, not necessarily by the Maya themselves. Before the Maya, we had another civilization called the Olmec that lived farther north in Mexico. And a lot of the elements that the Maya took up when they made the civilization, they borrowed from the Olmec. We don't know, we don't have any stories from the Olmec, so we don't know in this case, but many elements, we know that, for example, the Maya calendar came from the Olmec. So maybe these stories as well, but we're not sure. But in either case, they're still within one civilization, what we can call the civilizations of Mesoamerica. So Mesoamerica was this incredible cauldron of cultural creation, of civilizations over the millennia, over the centuries, including the Olmec, including the Maya, of course, the Aztecs, and many others, the Purépecha, the Zapotecs, and so forth. And they shared a lot in common. Now, actually, this goes up into what's currently in the United States, up into the area that's now Mexico, or New Mexico and Arizona, kind of that same cultural area, and it extends all the way down to Costa Rica, Panama. So they all had this notion of the universe going in a cycle, time going in a cycle, and with these periods of creation and destruction where everything starts over again, like we see here. Okay, so what I just said, that's the third bullet point here. And I've also mentioned that the flood arrives at the end of one of these cycles. Okay. Okay, so that's the Maya myth. Any questions? All right. Let me move to now we're up in Minnesota. And you see the image on the bottom, that is what we call a petroglyph, or rock carving, or rock image. Carving in this case. And so you can kind of make out that the figure on the left side is anthropomorphic, standing upright, 2 legs, body, arms, and these 2 big things protruding up, which we know from investigations that this represents what? An animal? Bunny. And so within our popular culture, within animation, I don't have any kids right now, or kids who are kid age, so I don't know what's going on now in the world of children's animation. But for many years, you had cartoons that starred these bunnies, these kind of tricky bunnies, whether it's Bugs Bunny or Roger Rabbit. And it turns out there's a reason. That is, some of the earlier animators went to North American, Native American corpus of mythology to get these characters. Another would be the Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote. Are these still current? Do you guys know who these are? Yes. So in this case, it's the rabbit. Okay, and I'm going to get to this, to the myth. The way I tell it is going to be slightly different from on this site. As I've mentioned, any myth has multiple versions. And some of it has to do with the myth teller is trying to impress their listeners, so they tell their version. Okay, as long as the core elements are there, people like to improvise and, prove that they're a good story, that you're a good storyteller if you can tell a slightly different story, but it's still a compelling story. So any character, so there's all these different characters through Native American mythology in different tribal groups and so forth, hundreds, if not thousands of different stories about each one of them. So it would be hard to, like, for example, mythologists like to collect the myths of, let's say, the Greeks and put it all in one book. It'd be really difficult to do that with Native Americans. There are some that have some of those myths, but it'd be hard to get all of them just because of this love of improvising. Okay, so I'm going to be telling you one of them. Okay, so, and this involves, third bullet here, the trickster tale that shows the exploits of a sentient animal when, sorry, I need, add grammar there, when they break the rules, suffer the consequences, and learns a lesson. So in general, last bullet here, these trickster tales are kind of moral lessons. They're kind of teaching by showing the opposite. They show what happens when you break the rules, usually something bad. I just want to go to, I'm not going to read from the site, I just want to click on it, show. This particular site I chose because it's by a modern day Native American who has designed a piece of art relating to the myth. And this is kind of a way of me showing that these are living things. This is not something of the past. People from this culture, from Native American cultures, are still engaging with this material. And the myth that he learned, Joshua here, is if you like. So I'm going to tell a story that's similar to this, but it has a few other elements. It comes from another site that has a broken link, and I like my version of the story, or that version of the story that I learned. So. Okay. So our tale begins in the village of Nanabush and his people. And the action begins during winter, very cold outside. Minnesota winters, you can imagine, it gets many degrees below zero there. The Nanabush's brother decides to go out hunting. And he decides to go out by himself. So he violates two rules of their community, or you might just say he violates common sense. They're also rules, kind of breaking taboos. One, you do not go hunting alone in any season. Always have a partner. Two, you especially don't go hunting in the middle of winter alone, because you might freeze to death. So, Nanabush hears he's going out and he goes, I hope he comes back quickly. A couple of weeks pass and no brother. Nanabush decides to go out, find his brother. Again, violating that taboo because he goes out alone as well. Trickster characters are often people, creatures who do foolish things. And this is no exception. So Nanabush is out looking for his brother. He comes up to this lake. In the middle of the lake is an island. A small island. In the middle of the island is a hill. Top of the hill is a tree. One lone tree. And he spies all the way across the lake a couple of figures who he soon realizes are the dreaded serpent people. So just like he's a talking rabbit, these are talking serpents. But they also have magical abilities. The serpent people and the rabbit people are mortal enemies. So Nanabush knocks his arrow in his bow and looses his arrow at the serpent people, and he ends up, because he's such a good shot, hitting the serpent people, but he's not such a good shot to kill them, he just wounds the serpent person. There's a couple of them. Their response, once they realize that it is a rabbit person on the other side, is to gear up their magic, and they start making the water rise. So Nanabush, by the way, he was on that island in the middle when he shot his arrow, and so he heads for the hill, runs up the hill. Water is still rising, lapping at his feet as he's going. He makes it to the top of the hill. The water is still rising. He climbs to the top of the tree. He's far up as he possibly can. The tree's beginning to bend. The water comes right up to his nostrils and just stops there. So he lucks out. He doesn't drown. Serpent people think they've got him, so they leave. It's like your typical villains, right? They leave before there's actually evidence that the hero met his end. So they leave. Nanabush gets down from the tree. At that point, he gathers some wood, he builds a raft, and he stows it at the base of the tree. He continues his journey. He continues to look for his brother. He has a few other adventures. In one of them, he meets an old woman who's a serpent woman in disguise. And he ends up knocking her out and stealing her clothes. So now he is dressed like a woman. So he's practicing transvestism as a way to be able to sneak into the lair of the serpent people. So he eventually gets to the lair of the serpent people, and he's able to go in because everybody just thinks he's a serpent person, because they're not looking closely, I guess, because he's wearing the clothes of the old woman. He's deep within the lair, which is a series of caves, or cave passages. So he's deep inside. And he finds his brother. Unfortunately, his brother is lying there dead. Noticing that, he flies into a rage. Tricksters are known for being very impulsive. So Nanabush is no exception. He flies into a rage. He looks around. He sees that one serpent person that has an arrow stuck in him, from the arrow he had fired before. He rushes up to him and he takes that arrow, plunges it in to the serpent person, who then passes away. At that point, his cover is blown. Everybody, the alarm goes out. We have an enemy in the cave. Let's get him. So Nanabush, the advantage of being a rabbit, so rabbit speed, he's running out of the cave. The serpent people in hot pursuit. And he makes his way all the way to that lake. Swims across to the island. And as he's going, he's calling out to all the forest creatures. if you want to live, follow me. I think I might have just quoted Arnold Schwarzenegger, but something like that. So all the forest animals are following him. They're, you know, they figure something's happening. And the lake waters start to rise because the serpent people get there. Now there's a whole bunch of them. So they're all causing the lake waters to rise. And so Nanabush gets to the top of the hill, he gets the raft out, he has all the animals get on the raft. It's not all the animals in the world, it's all the animals in that kind of lake area, basically. So there's enough room to get them all on the raft, even a moose. That's the largest. I think the moose was the largest animal that Native Americans knew about until European animals started coming. And so, you know, the water is rising, but they're on a raft, so they're safe. And there's so many serpent people that now you have a mega flood happening. Because they're all impulsive too. So they don't really think things through. And what happens is they end up drowning themselves. They got caught in their own abilities, they ended up drowning themselves. And so the serpent people drowned. I guess they were not water snakes. And Nanabush and the other animals survive on the raft. So next we have you know, the raft going on the water, you know, floating on the water for some time. No land in sight. You know how in stories from the Middle East, you have 3 birds sent out to find Nemo. And so 3 birds flying out, you might say horizontally, parallel with the horizon to find land. In this case, you have 3 animals that are searching for land, but in a different direction. 3 animals are sent down to the bottom to try to find, you know, the bottom of the now giant lake or ocean. And it's the animals are a muskrat, a loon, a bird called a loon, and a beaver. First 2, they come up, they're all out of breath, they haven't been able to go down far enough. The last, the beaver, it's got a long time. Everybody thinks he's perished, but he floats to the surface, he's barely breathing. He's got a little piece of dirt in his claw. So Nanabush takes that dirt, and he starts rolling it in his hand like this. And it gets larger and larger and larger. Now we get to the point that is our kind of leap of faith thing, that, you know, something that doesn't sound like it could actually happen, as if, you know, there could be serpent people and all of that. But he makes this piece of dirt large enough so it becomes a whole new world. And all the animals step off the raft onto this new globe of the earth. And so, you know, more eventually, this is before humanity is around, but eventually events lead to, you know, the arrival of humanity. All right, so that's the story of Nanabush. Questions? Yes.
If this story was before the humanity, how did we find it?
What?
If this story happened before the humanity, how did we find out?
Oh, it's a story told by Native Americans.
It's just a fake news. It's just a fake story, right?
Well, not to them.
But that's what they believe.
Well, but right, that's what they believe.
Also wondering if If it is before us, how do they find?
Because the word, the story, presumably when we transitioned from the animals to the humans, that information was carried forward. There's a time period of coexistence. Small time period. We could likewise ask, how do we know what happened before Noah's flood? There's no evidence left.
I know how we can find out that. The religious tells us the stories. Some of the books of God, like Torah or Injil or Quran, they give the story.
So we can think of these animals as supernatural creatures that perhaps can get their stories cast forward to humans.
If there is a human, yes, they can bring us.
See,
But do we have a communication between us and the animal? It's the case. How do we communicate?
because the animals are able to, because these are animals from a previous existence and they could talk. They're sentient, they're thinking animals, like the ones that we see in cartoons. These are not supposed to make rational sense, by the way. Remember from an earlier slide, it's not the plot that matters. It's the underlying lessons that matter. And whether you're a talking animal or a human, it's just as foolish to go hunting in the snow by yourself. And so that is one of the lessons that is being told here. Any other questions? Okay, so if we come to the last bullet point, as to what the major lesson of this is, these tales teach us the borderline between acceptable and unacceptable behavior, but also the balance between order and chaos. And so I could refer to another myth featuring somebody we met a little earlier. If you remember, the father of Deucalion, Deucalion being the flood survivor, was Prometheus, one of the Titans. Sometimes Prometheus is also regarded as a trickster. Okay, tricksters aren't always animals, often they are, but not in every single case. Why is Prometheus considered a trickster? Well, anybody know enough about Prometheus to know how he tricked the gods?
Well, wasn't he the guy that brought fire to the humans?
Yes. So the gods prohibited humans from having fire because they didn't trust us with fire. They thought we were too dumb. We just burn ourselves up. So, no fire for humans. That was the rule. But Prometheus, because he loved humanity, and he knew that fire could be also an advantage, bringing civilization, right? Cooking, heating, all of that. So he goes to Mount Olympus. He steals fire. There's an eternal flame, and he takes a torch and he lights it just like the Olympic runners do. And he carries it down to humanity. So he gives fire to humans. But oh boy, does he get in trouble. What was his punishment? That's Sisyphus.
He chained to a rock and eaten his liver.
Yes. So vultures, he's chained to a rock for eternity. I think it's eternity. Oh, well, again, the Greeks have different stories. I think there is one where he gets out of it, but I think in some of the stories, at least, he's chained there for eternity with vultures eating his liver, which apparently just grows back or something, because otherwise then his torture would end. So that'd be kind of like an earlier version of those fire and brimstone things you find in modern religions of, you're gonna go to hell and burn for eternity. But here, a Greek version of it as specifically Prometheus punishment. So this tells something about tricksters. And that says that tricksters often pay the price for their trickery, but they're bringing something positive as they do so, which may also have some negative features, because fire, how does that work out? How did that work out? I mean, in our reality as humans. So we, humans, decided that we're going to use fire for ourselves, for heating and cooking and all of that. And it's pretty positive, but there are some downsides. What are some downsides to fire? We see the news from Maui recently. Yeah. So without controlling, if you're unable to control that fire, it could destroy you. So all of this is kind of a lesson to us humans about technology, really. We like to think of technology as things like our phones. But fire, or at least the human use of fire, is also technology. It's one of the earliest technologies that humans developed. But technologies always have their upsides and their downsides. So in every case where you have, I shouldn't say in every case, in many cases where you have a trickster story, they're bringing something positive, but something negative also happens. So it's not about law, order, it's not about chaos or disorder, it's about the balance between these. So what do we have? Coming back to our flood myth theme. We have, in this case, no gods. Just sentient beings. But we have a violation, we have bad behavior. Yeah, first of all, Nanabush's brother going out alone, and then Nanabush doing the same thing following him, and the consequence, and then Nanabush acting impulsively and all of that, the consequences of that behavior. Negative consequences for Nanabush were, basically almost getting killed. But the positive things, the upside was that a whole new world is created. And no gods. We do have a boat, we have a raft, we do have animals. Right? So there are some parallel things there. Finally, to this question. The last slide. Why flood myths? In other words, why not some other natural disaster? Why are these myths so common at all? So it's addressing some very important questions. All of these myths are addressing some very important questions for humanity. Questions like, who's in charge of us? Or what is in charge of us? Do we have our own volition? Are we in command of our own destiny? Are we being controlled by some outside force? So in each case, we can at least say, we want to take more of a naturalistic approach to this, is that nature is a lot more powerful than us humans. And then we can bring in the supernatural to say, well, the supernatural beings are the ones in control of nature. Right? So one thing, so we are subservient to nature and the supernatural. But secondly, the supernatural beings need us. There's a symbiosis, a two-way street. And so that's clear in the Maya myth, where the world ends unless there's this balance between humans and the gods. Okay, so that's not about flood myths specifically. That could be any natural disaster. So floods have some other elements. So first of all, so I started at the top with the most, let's say, materialistic explanation. We're talking about agricultural civilizations. So there's good evidence that a lot of these flood myths came out of these agricultural civilizations, especially what we call those archaic civilizations, some of the earliest ones. The Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, people of the Indus Valley, in South Asian Indians, etc. The Maya. And all of them depended on agriculture. And in order to get a good agricultural crop, the water has to be there in the right amounts. Too much, with a flood, it destroys the crop. Of course, too little, with drought, it also destroys the crop. So you need to have the participation of nature, but you also need to have effective agricultural management. That means getting people to do their jobs, to make sure that those irrigation canals are dredged and all of that. A lot of really hard work that each individual laborer, farmer, peasant, might be reluctant to do. Hey, nobody wants to do more work than they have to. You're out in the fields and all of that. So how do you get people to do that? Well, these stories give people an incentive. If you don't do your job correctly, that means you're bad. And if you're bad, disaster can come. So this is a way of ensuring people toeing the line in these agricultural civilizations. So that's one level of explanation. Now we move on to the next. Here we get to the symbolism of water. It expresses our ambivalent relationship to water. Water is a good thing, and water is a bad thing, or could be, simultaneously. We can easily see how water is a good thing. Bodies are mostly composed of water. We need to consume a lot of water, stay alive. And we can see in many religious rituals, water being used as purification, as renewal, as in a baptism, for example. you have, for example, some forms of Christianity where a person is baptized by going down to a river and a person dunking them in the water. Okay, so water is very important symbolically in this way, in a positive sense. Fuel, purification, life. Okay, but on the other hand, too much water can be bad. Death, destruction, drowning. So it's those things that are symbols that have a dual aspect to them that tend to be very powerful symbols. I'll give you another example. Blood. Or you can say just the color red. So blood is necessary for, you know, our hearts are beating, blood through our arteries and our system. Blood is very important for our life and our survival. But, you know, spilled blood would be a negative sign, or a symbol of death. So blood, or even sometimes just the color red, has the dual aspect, life and death. Just like water has a dual aspect, life and or death. And it's because it could be either one, depending on the circumstances, that these become powerful symbols. So that's one explanation why water and floods in particular amongst natural disasters might have more resonance, might have more importance. Another level of explanation. Flood myths establish the relationship between the supernatural, whether they're gods, tricksters, or other beings, and humans. I mentioned that just a few minutes ago. We are created supernaturally and can be destroyed if we do not follow moral obligations to our creators. So that one is not specifically water, but it's a very important aspect of a flood myth, as probably like other natural disaster myths as well. Okay. The next one is very much about water itself. And so certain psychologists might favor this theory. I once had a professor when I was at Berkeley. His name is Alan Dundes. Some of you, when you're finding some myths, might find some references by him. He considered himself a person who follows psychoanalytic theory. He was a Freudian, which means that many things that he sees in symbolism can be traced back, as Freudians do, to the birth experience. So he would describe the flood myth as kind of a recreation of the moment of our birth, or rather the end of the flood myth. When we come on to dry land, would be a recreation of where we come out of the amniotic fluid that surrounds us when we're in the womb onto the dry land of the, the hospital table or wherever we're born. And we don't retain a conscious memory of that, but it's very deep in our subconscious. So his idea is that when we hear a myth like that, it taps into this early experience that we had and becomes resonant. Now, I don't know about that theory. I'm not 100% convinced, but it is a possibility. But in terms of which theory is correct, with myth and symbols, I guess I'm kind of getting into our next chapter a little bit by talking about symbols. You have an interesting variation about correctness. Myth or symbol doesn't necessarily have one interpretation. The way they work is the more possible interpretations they have, the more powerful the symbol or the myth. The reason for that is that allows more people with different backgrounds, with different mentalities, different things they're looking for to relate to that story or that symbol in different ways. So, in other words, if you go to, I may be evoking the earlier time. Oh, well, the movies are back, that's true. If you go to see Thor Ragnarok, you might appreciate it for the humor, the acting, the great, epic scenes of battle, the relationship between Thor, Loki, kind of a, opposites, siblings as opposites kind of a thing, etc. So the more elements that this one film has, the more it might attract different people who are looking for different things. It could be you just like film soundtracks. And maybe that's why you love Star Wars. You just love the music to Star Wars. So similarly, you love the music to these things. So it's not, Thor Ragnarok or Star Wars or whatever. It doesn't have one meaning, it piles different meanings. Each one linking to somebody, speaking to somebody, so that you have more people who are, listening to the, or listening to a tale or watching a film, and then spreading the word to others. That's how myths, symbols work. And what's the relationship between myth and symbols? You could say that myth is a story that strings a bunch of symbols together in a story form. So the rabbit trickster symbolizes one thing, the snake people symbolize another thing, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get more into symbols next. So I once read this analogy. I thought it was pretty compelling. So I'm in the last bullet here. Interpreting myth is like peeling an onion. You can keep peeling back the layers, and you find a center. Yeah, an onion is not like an avocado or a peach. It has a stone in the middle. There in that analogy, an avocado has a center. It's that big pit, and that would be to us the beauty of. But an onion, it's kind of empty in the center. It's peeling it back. So it doesn't have a core meaning at the middle. It's all those layers. That's the meaning. So, equally for a myth, it's all the layers that are the meaning of that myth. Okay. That's in 2 class sessions, about 2 hours, a little more than that. Next week will be. Any questions? Copy.